Watching or listening to Strangers in Space, and for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about the war between the land and the sea, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm Dylan.
Hi, I'm John.
And I'm JR. I think you're a bit optimistic if you think you're going to get 30 minutes out of that.
I could talk about Russell Tovey for ages. I've got nothing to say on him. So we're going to do a little news roundup. There's a couple of news stories that have sort of happened in the last week or so. And the first one, quite a minor story, but people made a big deal of it, possibly for the wrong reasons on the internet, was the BBC revealed Doctor Who has contributed 256 million to the UK economy, and everybody sort of took that as profit, but it's not profit. It's just what they spent over between 2005 and 2022. I think it's the money they put in the economy in Wales in that time.
Yeah, it's not even always just that, because usually when they calculate those figures, they're calculating the knock-on. So it's not just this is the amount of money that's been spent, but it's also, and the people that we employ have spent this amount of money in shops and on houses and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And basically, it's the trickle-down effect of everybody and everything that's being done in the name of Doctor Who has put into the economy X amount more than it's taken out of the economy, and the balance is about 250 million, right?
And it's sorry, go on, John.
Did we get a source for the figure? Because that's what you always need to look at. That's what's hiding any dodgy maths.
Well, it was a BBC report, wasn't it? And it was Doctor Who was featured in it, but obviously Doctor Who fans being Doctor Who fans and certain websites being certain websites took it as like, look how amazing Doctor Who's doing. And it's not a small amount of money, but it's not huge. I mean, I'm sure if you looked at all the Tesco Expresses in Cardiff for that period, it would have contributed a lot more. But it's just, it sounds like a big number, but it's more the BBC sort of justifying, quite rightly, this is what your license fee is doing, but Doctor Who fans have taken it in a slightly different way.
Well, on the same note, and here's something that gets trotted. Oh, here's a situation that has arisen thanks to the Disney Plus deal that I don't think people in general are kind of thinking about and therefore understanding. So we've got the situation now where the BBC commissions Doctor Who and they put in a certain amount of money. They commission it from Bad Wolf, who make Doctor Who, and they make it for a certain amount of money. And the amount of money that Bad Wolf are making it for is more than the BBC, because what used to happen is that BBC Studios made Doctor Who partly from the money that the BBC put in as the commissioning partner, and partly from the money that they would get from the overseas sales. And the whole idea of BBC Studios is that they're supposed to sell the programmes and they can put some of that money back into the programmes, but they have to put some of that money back in the general BBC pot. And the reason why I think there's been this discrepancy between what people think Disney are paying for Doctor Who and how much extra Doctor Who has in the budget is because part of what Disney are paying for Doctor Who is the part of the pot that BBC Studios used to have that just goes back into general BBC production. So news or radio or current affairs or whatever, it just goes back into the general BBC pot. So, and I don't know what the figures are. I can't remember. I'm sure I've read them, or I'm sure I've read people speculate. Say the BBC themselves are paying 30 million for a series of Doctor Who, and Disney are paying another 40 million on top of that, let's say, for this series of Doctor Who. That means 70 million altogether, but the actual series of Doctor Who is only costing Bad Wolf 50 million to make, and 20 million goes back to the general BBC pot. Now, I've kind of basically made those figures up, but that's how the situation works. Not every penny that Disney puts in is going direct to Doctor Who. Disney are not paying for Doctor Who to be produced, in other words. So it's not like they're not getting their money's worth. They're paying for the opportunity to put Doctor Who on their service. This is how much it's costing them. And the BBC has to make a certain amount of profit out of that. And that profit is what goes back into the general BBC coffers to make News 24 or CBeebies or whatever.
Yeah. And just sort of a little bit of a comparison here, and these aren't 100% fair comparisons, but for instance, Netflix over the last 2 years has generated 132 million for the economy just in the southwest of England over 2 years. The Force Awakens, when that was being shot over sort of 2.5 years and doing the post, there was 150 million put into the UK economy by a Star Wars film. So as a sort of comparison, I mean, anything that stimulates the economy, fantastic, sure, but it sounds like a lot of money, but it's actually not, if that makes sense.
Fair enough. Right,
Um,
are we talking about the war between the land and the sea, or are we doing more figure crunching?
Well, I've got the ratings for Doctor Who, and I thought we'd do an in-depth dive from 63 to now. What about that? No.
It works for me.
So
we could do a little bit on the ratings for the last series, because one thing we have not talked about at all with the last series is the ratings, basically. I don't have the figures in... Well, I don't have the figures in front of me because this was a last-minute thing and I wasn't supposed to be on it, and then all of a sudden I was available. So I've no idea what we're talking about and why, and don't have any figures in front of me. But okay, bigger ratings picture. When the Tennant specials were on, they were on in November, which is a dark time of year where people watch television more often. It was David Tennant, it was specials. They got big numbers, like 7 million, because, it was a big event.
Yeah.
I always said that when the series came back in the spring, and we didn't know at what time it was going to be then, and Dylan, I'm pretty sure you and me had this conversation, that the figures would go back to something around about, or probably just below, where the Jodie Whittaker figures had been for Flux, or something like that. And especially as it was fairly late in the year, which is May and June, which is just about the worst time of year for getting people to watch television, bar from maybe July and August, where we are now. Those figures were ostensibly pretty low. So they didn't look very good at all, really, those figures. About 4 million thereabouts on the 7 days, or just under, and adding about another third of a million on the 28 days. But the interesting thing is the Russell T Davies conversation, because they asked him about it, didn't they? Somebody asked him about it somewhere, I can't remember. He gave a quote, and a lot of people have been, I think, slightly misunderstanding this quote, because he said, actually, we've hit all our targets, but the important target was the young audience, the under, I can't remember whether he put it as under 30s or under 35s, but you know what I'm talking about, Dylan. The BBC is paid for through public money, and as part of that deal, there's this thing called the Charter, which almost anybody watching or listening to will know about the Charter, and that is the law, the rules by which the BBC is governed. And one of the things that the Charter says is the BBC must make programming to cater for all audiences, and no audience must get left behind. So there's a lot of stuff for children. For the toddlers, you've got CBeebies, and then for children up to about 12, I guess, or so, you've got CBBC. But you then got this gap, the sort of teen audience between, say, 13 or 14 and up to like 30. You're talking about basically the YA audience, which is generally reckoned to be teenagers, but it's people in their 20s as well.
Yeah.
And you've got BBC Three, but BBC Three only really has a certain amount of reach, and it's kind of ghettoed television, to look at it a certain way. It's sort of taking the teenagers and the young audience off and saying, right, the programming we're making for you is stuck here. Whereas once you get to that sort of age group, actually those years should be catered for by regular television as well. And one of the things they wanted to do with Doctor Who was try and target it towards that sort of teen and early 20s age group, which, if you ask me, was always what Russell T Davies did the first time around anyway. I think the sort of Rose and Ten stuff is the absolute prime example of Doctor Who specifically aiming towards a particular demographic. And, doing fart jokes for the kids and doing stuff that the grannies and the parents could enjoy too. But basically, the prime target there is people in their teens and 20s. I think that's why Russell T Davies is back, to aim Doctor Who at the people in their teens and 20s as well. And the interesting thing about this first series with Russell T Davies back is that they've started playing it on BBC Three again. So the demographic they're hitting is about 4 million people of an audience overall, but BBC Three is adding another 1/4 to 500,000. I think the first episode added about 1 million, according to Russell T Davies. Since then, it's dipped to about 500,000 or a bit less, which is almost exclusively teenagers and people in their 20s, which means the actual viewing figures for Doctor Who are the 4 million that we're getting from BBC One and iPlayer, plus about another 500,000 from BBC Three, which means the overall amount of people in their teens and 20s who are watching Doctor Who has been somewhere between 500,000 and 750,000, which is far exceeding the target they had for that demographic. And in other words, Doctor Who has hit its targets.
But I also think there's a big thing about this BBC Three repeat, and everybody's sort of going, well, it's amazing. But it's also an unfair comparison to the end of the Moffat era, the Chibnall era, because they didn't have that repeat. So
No, they didn't.
Yes, it's bringing more people in, but who's to say if, you know, those eras had that repeat, they wouldn't have had the same thing?
Oh, they would, but I think the important thing is, so I didn't mean to make it sound as if, the Moffat years, the Chibnall years were underperforming because they didn't have it. But what I'm saying is they are deliberately targeting this age group.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying, and they're hitting that age group. They are getting those numbers because those are people who may or may not have bothered with Doctor Who on iPlayer, or who, and we all know what teenagers are like. I was on the train up to York for 5 hours a couple of days ago, and the person sitting in front of me, she was about, I don't know, between 18 and 24, and she just had iPlayer on for the entire trip. She just sat there and watched iPlayer for 5 hours. From what I could get, I mean, I wasn't watching, but every time I looked up,
sounds like you were.
Well, no, she was right in front of me, but the other side of the aisle, and we were both in the aisle seats. So her screen was like literally in my line of sight for the entire trip, and it was just iPlayer all the way. Yeah. But you know what I mean? The BBC had a target, and the BBC achieved that target.
Yeah,
and that's the thing.
I think the thing is, it's basically business as usual. I think if there is a slight failing, I think it's to do with the scheduling. You could have far, exceeded those figures had it been a darker month. I also think
it's coming forwards by 6 weeks next year, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Which I think is a telltale sign. But also, if you look at the amount of promotion that series had compared to, say, Flux or Capaldi's last season, they've obviously spent a lot of money on promotion. So there must be voices somewhere within the BBC going, we spent all this money and it's, we've done this huge campaign and it hasn't worked in a way. It hasn't. Doctor Who's doing great business, fantastic, but it's not been this big, let's get so many new people in. It's just the same sort of 4.5 million people watching.
Yeah. I can't disagree that they probably would have liked to have had much higher numbers, and let's be honest, we all would have liked to have seen much higher numbers too, wouldn't we? But I think it's just the day and age. Yeah. It is because it was on in May, but also it is because there's just so much choice of other things out there. Like, for example, this girl who was sitting in front of me, she was watching the iPlayer all the afternoon, but she watched a film, she watched a couple of series that had probably been on like months ago. She wasn't watching the iPlayer, what's on today, watching today's television on the iPlayer. She was going back through old stuff.
Yeah.
She was just catching up on things by the look of it.
And that's the important thing, that you're making an episode of Doctor Who not for the overnights. You're making a series that people can jump in whenever they want to. And, there will be people who heard about, whether they loved, loathed, or just sort of enjoyed Doctor Who, and they'll say to their mates, "Oh, did you see Doctor Who recently? You should go back," and they'll watch the whole series sort of six months later or a month later. It's there to be viewed eternally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all do it, don't we? Go back and sort of think, somebody recommended to me X series a few months ago and I've never got round to it, and it pops into your head and you think, I've got a couple of nights free, maybe I'll catch it up.
Yeah.
And that's how TV works these days.
Yeah. So business as usual. The sky isn't falling, but neither is it a huge celebration of a mass reinvention and a massive influx of people.
There's a lot of talk. Certain people are talking about the fact that Disney don't make a decision about whether they carry on with Doctor Who until the new year, because they just had this deal for 2 series and the 1 spin-off, and whether they'll bother to keep up with it. And a lot of people are saying they'll probably walk away because the figures haven't been stellar. But I think it's actually much more likely that Disney buy the back catalogue than walk away, because actually what drives the numbers is the back catalogue. If you think about it, if they've got 14 episodes, that's going to get a certain amount of people coming to it. But if they had 140 or 280 episodes, even with just the same number of people, the amount of hits you get on those increased exponentially. And that's what keeps people paying for your service.
Go on, John.
So, I was going to say there was an article, I think I shared it on the group, from Deadline the other day, where an industry take. Basically, it's a no news is good news thing. There's nothing to say there at all. We don't know which way anything's jumping.
And it's the clickbait article, wasn't it? The Deadline
totally.
one.
Inside sources include Tony Jordan from Glass and the editor of Doctor Who magazine. Yeah.
Only official quote they had in there was just 4 words: okay, but not stellar. And okay, I mean, stellar would mean, it's getting Star Wars numbers, but they're paying something like a quarter of what they pay for, and perhaps even a tenth of what they pay for Star Wars, but certainly very much a fraction of what they pay for Star Wars. Okay generally tends. How did it do? It did okay.
Yeah.
Are you going to pay for it? Are you going to carry on with your subscription? Yeah, okay. I mean, okay is generally not the word you use when you want to say, I'm getting rid of something. How's your car? It's okay. I'm getting rid of it. That's not the word to use.
It's a low-cost series as well from Disney's point of view. So they're quite happy on that front. I'm taking it.
And it's about 3 million an episode, apparently, whereas the Star Wars series is costing something like 18 million an episode.
And it's worth pointing out that renewals for streamers do take some time. Like there was a Masters of the Universe reboot that Kevin Smith did, and the renewal for the second series came about 6 months after the first season was out, because that's when it hit that point of Sandman was 90 days after the first series finished. It's like they're assessing these numbers over a long period of time, not the week it went out. It's
like on Doctor Who, we kind of got used to it. So when it first came back, we were always teetering on that it's going to be cancelled. But we've got used to it being renewed multiple years in advance, basically, haven't we?
Yeah.
And even if Disney did pull out, Doctor Who itself is not going away. It still makes too much money for the BBC, even if it's not Disney. That's where the money's coming from. They'll just go back to.
Yeah, Russell's quoted already on that, isn't he? He said we'd find a way.
Oh yeah. And they'd still have the money that BBC are putting in, and then BBC Studios and/or Bad Wolf would just find another partner. And the way television works, and you know this as well as I do, Dylan, is the way Bad Wolf do it is, and I can't remember, there's an expression for it, but they pay the money in advance that they expect to get back later from the streamers. And if they say, go back to the figures I was using before, if Doctor Who's costing 6 million an episode, and the BBC are putting in 3 million, and Disney are putting in let's say it's costing 4.5 million an episode. BBC are putting in 3, Disney are putting in 3. It's costing 4.5, and 1.5 million goes back to the BBC. If Bad Wolf loses the Disney money, they can still make Doctor Who for 4.5 million, because they know they're going to get at least 5 million from some other, at least 2 million on top of the BBC 3 million from some other streamer. In other words, they'll get more than their money's back on whatever deal they're going to do. And so they can put that money in themselves, knowing they're going to get that money back in the long term, even if they don't get it back immediately.
Yeah. What they have in Disney is it's a global distribution platform. Way television works is, and indeed film, you're talking about sales to territories, and somebody might take it up in America, some people might take it in Europe, some people might take it Eastern Europe. It could be country by country, or it could be continent by continent, or demographic by demographic. So if Disney walked away, Bad Wolf may cut a deal with somebody like Amazon to take all territories, or it might be like before, where it's like in Canada it's on this network, in America it's on this streaming service. It's much of a muchness. Doctor Who has a value in terms of the amount of money it makes a year, and as long as it costs less to make it, and they figure out what that profit point is, that is how they derive the budget.
Well, absolutely. And all these other streamers like Amazon and so on and so forth did talk. They were in talks. They were interested before Disney got it. I'm assuming the BBC went with Disney, A, for the kudos of having the Disney name, but B, also because that audience is much more the audience that Doctor Who would likely play well to. Plus, I think, because there's some other BBC stuff on Disney, I said this before, I wonder if also this is partly a test to see how well BBC does on Disney. I could imagine in the longer term, Disney and the BBC just partnering up, and a lot of the stuff from the BBC just turning up on Disney around the rest of the world, because that's a great way to get the BBC stuff around the world, right? All on one platform where everybody knows, where it's easy to find. So you could just have a Disney plus BBC bit on there. So like I say, I think it's much more likely that Disney picks up the rest of the Doctor Who back catalogue than that they get rid of Doctor Who, frankly. Because otherwise, there's all that investment that they've thrown in, and then 2 years later, and who wants to invest that much money and then just sort of throw it away?
And they can't even write it off against their tax like they have done some of their other shows, because they can't just shunt it to one side, never to be seen again.
No.
Should we talk about the war between the land and the sea then?
Have we got nothing else?
We could talk about Jodie Whittaker doing Big Finish.
Okay, let's talk about the war between the land and the sea. I mean, it's nice that Jodie Whittaker's doing Big Finish, and with Yasmin Mandip Gill, not Yasmin Finney, Mandip Gill. It's lovely to see it's happening, but it's sort of to the side of our purview, really. We tend to talk about TV stuff here, don't we?
Yeah, I just hope they give it to the younger writers at Big Finish, not the older guys, because I think that's where the interesting Whittaker era stuff will lie.
Do you reckon, John? Do you reckon?
I think so. There you go.
You don't want 12 episodes of Justin Richards and Nick Briggs?
Oh, no. If it was just 12 Nick Briggs, I'm fine.
But Nick Briggs doesn't write
Justin
anymore,
is a deal breaker.
He writes very rarely. He probably does one a year, something like that.
Does he? I thought he'd stopped writing.
Justin Richards has.
But on the subject of Jodie Whittaker and Pete McTighe writing for the television.
Great link there. So
that's why I present these things.
He's a professional.
Yeah. So it as we talk, it is Comic-Con, and there's been the big Hall H panel for Doctor Who on the Friday of the event, I think it was. And as may have come to a surprise to somebody, I don't know who, they announced there's going to be a Doctor Who spin-off. John, are we excited about this?
Well, the way I look at it, they're going, oh yeah, and there's Kate Stewart and whatever the hot soldier is. Ibrahim.
Colonel Ibrahim, yeah.
So this is the Men from Unit spin-off that Barry Letts and Terence Dicks were talking about in the 70s, isn't it?
Yeah.
Basically. They've even chosen a unit, or a Barry Letts monster, rather, I should say, for the... well, we think. It's not confirmed, is it?
It has been confirmed.
Yeah.
Yeah. He said that it's about the Sea Devils from the 70s. They wake up and the oceans have been destroyed and they're pissed off, essentially.
Which is not a bad premise, to be fair.
Yeah.
But it's Russell Tovey. I don't think Russell Tovey's a lead actor.
No. I mean, that didn't excite me that much. But I do think, because we were all sat there going, so it's going to be a series with Gemma Redgrave and Bonnie Langford. And it's like, there was no real lead material. And whether you think Russell Tovey is or isn't a lead man material, they've obviously gone, we need to create these new characters to sort of be our way in and leads for the series. And
Midshipman Alonso is hanging around. You never know.
It's not him. He said it, hasn't it?
Russell to cast somebody he fancies rather than somebody who can lead a series, right?
Yeah, which is exactly how television in the 50s and 60s used to work, and look what ended up happening there. So,
William Hartnell.
I mean, we've all been expecting this spin-off for a long time, haven't we? It's come as no real surprise. I guess the only real surprise is that they haven't announced Bonnie Langford or Sophie Aldred or somebody like that yet.
Yeah, it's just who they've got in the contract, isn't it? I think. I do like that they've got. Is it Dylan Holmes Williams directing it?
Mm-hmm.
Because his stuff was really interesting on the last series, so
Yeah.
that's a good sign.
And in terms of the premise, it's Pete McTighe. You know, he did Praxeus, which is a similar sort of theme there as well. And I'm a big Praxeus fan, so you know.
Hey, seconded.
I just worry that because it is him, but Russell T Davies will obviously be doing episode 1 and/or episodes 1 and 5, right?
Yeah,
plus maybe even one in the middle. Who knows? But I imagine 1 and 5. So it's not Pete McTighe taking the lead, is it? By any stretch of the imagination. And Russell T Davies will set up exactly what he always sets up. He does it the same thing every time, pretty much, doesn't he?
I must say, when they announced it and they said it was Pete McTighe and Russell T Davies, my heart sank a little bit. I was much more interested in a Pete McTighe spin-off than a Russell T Davies one.
Yeah, and yet like Torchwood, it'll be Russell T Davies will do all the shit work at the start that everybody else has to live with afterwards.
And it probably just is that Russell T Davies' name on a show is a much easier sell as well, in case they're looking to do that.
Yeah, for the moment it is anyway.
Yeah.
See, the thing about it is, and I think I've said this before on the podcast way back when the rumours first came out, and I guess because I live relatively near the coast and in the southwest, what I really wanted to see, and in Wales, right? Not all this. Most of the coast of Wales is city free. What I really want to see is something a bit more like the Doomwatch movie. Do you remember the Doomwatch movie?
Never seen
where
it.
you get Ian Bannon in place of the leads. So Ian Bannon comes in as the guest actor who plays a character that we've not seen before, but that apparently is part of the organisation, but we just haven't seen. He gets called to a tiny little village on the coast where something weird is happening, and it turns out there's this disease that's been picked up that's turning people sort of into monsters, kind of, or it's turning people a bit strange, and the rest of the villagers are seeing them as monsters. And the whole point of it is it's like a horror story with a science fiction backdrop. It's set on the coast, lots of spooky goings on in a little village. That first 10 minutes of 73 yards, right? Except with sea devils and sort of done in a sort of slightly Wicker Man kind of way. That's what I wanted to see from a spin-off with the Sea Devils, but it's Unit, isn't it? What do you think the chances of it being Unit going to the coast or the Sea Devils coming to London?
What was it? Sea Devils in IKEA? You were saying, Joe?
I don't think it was me who made that joke, but that's it, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a lot of it will be taking place in people's kitchens. A lot of it will be taking place in Unit HQ. A lot of it will be Sea Devils in the fucking sewers underneath fucking London or whatever.
Hey, that works.
I just think there's I'm hoping not. Or I'm hoping maybe if Russell T Davies sets that up in the first episode, that Pete McTighe takes it somewhere else. But it's just, all I can see is Aliens of London with Sea Devils instead of Slitheen.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I mean, it says when they reveal themselves, it triggers an international crisis. So cue shots of, some bad American actors pretending to be the US government, some people doing terrible French accents pretending to be the French government, that sort of thing.
And we'll get Trinity Wells.
Trinity Wells,
yeah.
She's bound to have a conspiracy theory about it. They're not really lizard men. They're just people dressed up as lizards because they want to set off the nuclear bombs and so on.
Before one comes in and fries her with the lamp.
Yeah.
And then she gets away with it because she's got to turn up for the next spin-off, which will be Vord on the streets of Cardiff.
Oh, I'm in for that.
Yeah. It's impossible to do a bad bit of Doctor Who that features the Vord. Fact.
Quite right.
But Russell T Davies's thing is urban, and Doctor Who has always been better when it's suburban or rural, right?
Yeah. It's sort of because the moment you start invading cities and stuff, it just becomes, oh, here's another alien invasion everybody's going to forget about by the next series. Whereas, when it's rural, it's conceivable that it's covered up and nobody knows about it. So for me, it's about that believability thing. You want your invasion of the world or the city to be done very sparsely as like a real game-changing moment in the series, not just oh look, there's some cubes there, or oh look, it's the Daleks and the Cybermen. It's just again and again and again.
And the thing is, if it's in the city, it's just. But Marvel do this with 10 times the budget. So it's never going to compete with Marvel. So why are you putting it somewhere where it competes with Marvel? But Doctor Who has a history going right back to even things like Reign of Terror, or even Dalek Invasion of Earth. Starts out in the city in the first episode, right? But it gets more and more rural as it goes on, because it knows, like the series Survivors, right, which goes out into the countryside from the end of the first episode, it knows that if you want to do something weird on a relatively low budget, take it away from the city, because as soon as you get out of the city, you can start to make things look and feel a bit different. Whereas, if 90% of the population are living in cities, if you set it in a city, really all you're giving them is the view they get from their front door every time they open it.
And it's difficult to do something like Invasion of the Dinosaurs, say, these days, where you've got the empty city, which is something that is genuinely eerie. You've got that thing, the city is not in its natural state. It's much more difficult to cordon off areas to do that kind of thing these days.
Yeah. Is there anything else we want to say on the war between the land and the sea, or should we talk a little bit about Christmas?
Well, we should say Gugu and Bartha Raw's back as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So she and Russell Tovey obviously are playing different characters, right?
Yeah.
Which to me feels, again, slightly just like a lack of imagination, because it's like basically he's brought back two characters who played side characters but could have been companions from the original RTD1, and now he's making them main characters instead of side characters, because they've both had fairly successful careers since then. And it's just like, get a bit more imagination about it.
Yeah.
Well, they know they can do the job, so that's what it comes down to, I suspect.
But it also comes back to this new era of Doctor Who just not being about bringing in new and exciting talent. It's about just retreading the same shit again and again and again and going back to your trusted people.
It is. It feels, Ncuti Gatwa obviously is the big exception to the rule.
Yeah.
He's the new talent. But outside of, the Doctor and the Companion in the main series, everything else feels very much like just going back to RTD1 for your inspiration and for your talent. And you just wanted to see something different, didn't you? And you were just hoping that the spin-off would give you something different, but it just looks like more of the same.
Yeah. This spin-off could have been done in 2006. If you showed it to someone and said it's from 2006, I'm almost certain that is what it will sound and look like, much like everything else we've seen.
Basically.
So it could have saved us from Torchwood, is what you're saying?
Torchwood at least was trying to do something new with Doctor Who.
Was it?
Yeah. Have you not seen the sex gas episode?
Well, but see, this was always the thing for me with Torchwood. It had a Doctor Standing character. It had a cast of pseudo companions, small number of regulars, and Sarah Jane Adventures was exactly the same. Doctor Standing character and a small bunch of pseudo companions. And the war between the land and the sea, I don't know. I'm hoping it doesn't follow exactly that formula, but I can imagine that this is Russell T Davies going, gosh, what if Russell Tovey was the Doctor? I could never cast him as the Doctor now. Well, why don't we make him the Doctor in a series where he's not playing the Doctor?
Russell
and Gugu
Tovey...
and Bartha Raw, she should have been the companion. Oh, I can rectify that now.
Yeah, Russell Tovey will be some scientist doing some sort of climate or change work on the sea, measuring sea pollution, and he'll discover the Sea Devils, and he'll also find a neat way to destroy them all at the end.
100%.
And whatever scientific advisor unit have got in that week, that they'll pop along and help them with some magical poison or something like that, and that's the end.
Did they discover hexachromite gas in this episode?
Yeah, quite
the origin story.
Undoubtedly. Go on.
Quick chat about Christmas. Comic-Con.
Have you done your shopping?
Not yet. At Comic-Con, they played a little clip from the Christmas episode, Joy to the World, written by Stephen Moffat. Are we all really excited about Christmas?
It's very Moffat
Mostly,
doing
yeah.
Moffat. God, I saw someone going, "Oh, I hated this one. The 11th Doctor did it." Well, that was over a decade ago now. So,
Oh God, 15 years almost.
Yeah,
I'm
coming
assuming
up.
he's talking like Doctor the Widow and the Wardrobe, or something else.
yeah, or the opening of the Impossible Astronaut, maybe.
Yeah.
I guess so. But it's such a classic. But it's not quite, is it? In fact, the scene that it's most like is the bit in Christmas Carol where you see him with Laurel and Hardy stepping out of the other scene where he's in the current day. So he's on the film, isn't he? And then he's in the present day. So he's stepping between time zones like he does in A Christmas Carol, all at the same time, all within the same sequence of events with no time in between them, sort of thing. So he's got this drink and this whatever it is, and he's looking for the person who ordered it. It's, so I'll tell you what it reminded me of is in Coupling, and I've been rewatching Coupling, so this is right on the tip of my brain at the moment as well. One of the things that Stephen Moffat does in Coupling is every second or third episode, he'll do something that's about the format of a television narrative. So, for instance, he does that episode Split, where at the start of the scene, at the start of the episode, they're lying in bed next to each other, and then it splits off, and then you follow them both basically in real time with a split screen camera effect, while one does one thing and then the other does something else, and they sort of piggyback off each other throughout the episode. And then, of course, there's the famous one where he did the girl who speaks Israeli, and then we see it from her point of view, where we see what she says, and so on and so forth. He's doing something in all of those episodes where he's playing with the format of what television is, and he'll go off and do 3 or 4 different things, and at the end, they all feel like different things, and at the end, he brings them together, and you realize that actually they're all part of the same story after all. This, to me, felt like, I hope, those, I think it was 3 or 4 different places he showed us where the Doctor goes with this tray, and it felt very much like they're 3 very not connected places, but because it's Stephen Moffat, I'm expecting by the end of the story for all 3 or 4 of those places to have somehow been indelibly connected in a way that resolves the plot.
Yeah. And we get a Silurian, and everybody online is going, "Oh well, it's going to set up the spin-off," but the spin-off's still what, 18 months away, something like that. So it feels like
filming.
Yeah, the appearance of a Silurian is completely irrelevant to the war between the land and the sea. They just obviously, I don't even expect it to be a Silurian story, right? Nobody thinks that. It's just, we needed a monster, let's make it
a cameo.
Yeah, exactly.
And the dialogue might be more relevant, the space seed stuff.
Yeah.
If anything.
My guess, when all we knew about it was that some of it was set on Everest, my guess about it being the Great Intelligence and actually finally bringing the Yeti back looks like very likely not right. So I thought if some of it's set on Everest, and for all we knew, a great substantial part of it, and with Russell T Davies, Stephen Moffat have been the one who brought the Great Intelligence back, with Richard E. Grant having done some work or something down in Cardiff lately because he went and had his head scanned, and with there being all that talk after, what was this? It was the snowmen, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That he brought back the Great Intelligence, but we didn't get to see the Yeti, and that was the bit of the Great Intelligence that was always the most interesting bit. I thought, oh, maybe he's thought about all of those things and put them together and said, let's do an actual Yeti story for Christmas. It doesn't look it doesn't look like it will be, but with one caveat: if it's the Great Intelligence, there's no reason actually that the Great Intelligence couldn't be planting Yeti in various different times and places around. If in this new age of magic gods that Russell T Davies has conjured up, right?
Yeah, and those balls can get anywhere.
Exactly. Well, that's it. That it wouldn't put it past Stephen Moffat to do a story about those magic balls, and in one place they're Yeti, in another place they're robot something else.
I always thought he missed a trick in the snowmen, not having the silver spheres inside the snowmen. It would have sort of drawn it all together. But,
Yeah, it would.
well, I look forward to it not being the Yeti and to you being wrong. So that's fantastic.
I will be wrong. Yeah, I will be wrong. I'm not predicting that anymore. That was my first thought when I saw the scene on Everest, because we saw some photos of them filming something that was set on Everest, didn't we? And that was the thought that struck me then. I don't predict it to be that now, but I still think it's a slight possibility.
Yeah, you never know.
Nicola Coughlan, what is she from?
Derry Girls and Bridgerton.
And did she come up through acting school, or has she come from something else?
I don't think so. The first thing I ever saw him was Derry Girls. That was a big break.
What's Derry Girls? Is that a fiction?
It's a sitcom, Channel 4 sitcom. It's about
Is it?
4 teenagers during the kind of the end years of the Troubles.
Sure.
You should catch it up because some of it is absolutely stellar.
Well, the scene that we saw, these 3 minutes or whatever it was, she didn't look all that good to me.
No, but I mean, this era has a certain way of making actors not look fantastic.
Yeah. Well, Russell T Davies did the same thing in RTD1, didn't he?
Yeah, it's like tonally, it's try not to be very good at acting. That's the script notes.
I always found the problem with RTD1 was it was the family atmosphere, man, and everybody was having such a good time that actually when they turned the cameras on, all you could see was people enjoying themselves rather than acting.
So certainly by that last season, that's what it felt like for me. But we shall see. So basically, everybody should have a rubbish time, and then they might put in a slightly more earnest performance.
Yeah, maybe.
Right, should we wrap things up? Does anybody have anything else they need to share with the world news-wise?
No, his Anne Churchman died. That's about it, isn't it? I think.
How did she?
I didn't know that. Yeah, yesterday, 99. So
Wow.
genuine TV history with the Grace Archer stuff.
Well, that is a good innings.
And thanks for bringing us that right at the end there, John.
Always. I like to end on a positive note.
Well, as it's the weekend of Comic-Con, I'm sure that we'll be back here tomorrow talking about the Doctor Who and Star Trek crossover that's definitely not happening. It's not happening. It's not happening.
No.
But yeah, we'll speak again soon, as we usually say. So I've been Dylan.
I've been John.
And I've been JR.
And we will speak again soon.
Excellent.